Fantasy Source Football Podcast. My name is David A. Arnott, sitting here with George Winkler and Sean Not Lights Out Merriman. Today, we have a jam-packed show for you, and leading off, we have perhaps the biggest fantasy news of the season thus far. We have a quarterback change in Denver. Tim Tebow. This is all you really need to know. I mean, what do you think about him, George? Just off the bat, to me, it looks like it's a can't-lose pickup. You just pick him up and hope that he turns into the running and throwing type of quarterback who might be a borderline fantasy starter as his ceiling.
Yeah, the funny thing about Tim Tebow is he goes out and he completes 4 of 10 passes and a half of football. And now everybody's clamoring over him on the waiver wire. And that's because with Tim Tebow, he's not conventional. And in fantasy, we don't really care that he looks funny throwing the ball or that he's going to run and take hits from linebackers. It's just what's he going to do in the end of the day, and that's put up a good score. I mean, in a half of football last week, he put up a score that was comparable with half of the league.
I mean, one of the things that we talk about often on Fantasy Source is that yards are yards, and especially in non-receptions leads where a quarterback or touchdown leads were 4 points for a passing touchdown. Tebow is a very interesting type of guy because he's going to run for 20, 30 yards each game, and they have designed runs for him, especially in the red zone, that give him a little bit of an extra benefit. It's kind of like how Cam Newton, yes, he's threw for a lot of yards in those first couple weeks, but a big part of his value is the running that he brings to the table, and especially running when he's in the red zone and in goal line situations.
You know, that's totally true, David, because when you talk about that, a prime example that you could compare it to, as well as Newton, is a Michael Vick, where you look at a guy this week who throws 4 interceptions, but he winds up being one of the top fantasy quarterbacks when the week is done because he gets the rushing yards. And it's the same thing with Tebow. You know, 5 points through rushing 50 yards is the equivalent of throwing for 150 yards, which is extremely important in fantasy.
Now, I just threw it out there that I think that he's pretty much, his ceiling is maybe the 10th best fantasy quarterback in a given week, that sort of thing, if you play in the matchups well. So, I mean, I just don't think he's a good enough thrower yet to actually really deserve to get real consideration for you to drop someone like Josh Freeman or Joe Flacco or someone in that range. But I do think, and in one of my leads, I've picked him up just to be a bye week fill-in. I don't think that's a terrible idea. Where do you, Sean, see him as his value moving forward?
Well, the thing that you have to remember is he's on a bye week coming up, so he won't be available immediately. The way that I look at it is, he has to be looked at right now as a potential viable QB2. If you can get him as a QB3, fine. That's a lot of depth on your bench to have quarterbacks, not conventional per se to keep 2 quarterbacks on your bench. But, with the running points that he's going to get, I could see him as a viable quarterback 2 that you should be, ready to go when your quarterback 1 goes on his bye week.
I mean, you mentioned he's on his bye. And, George, when you're thinking about the value that he brings, does it matter to you, on top of what you think his talent is, does it matter to you that there are only really 4 or 5 more bye weeks left to fill in throughout the rest of the season? Or are you willing to wait and see? Is he worth a pickup if you're looking for a bye week quarterback?
I think he is, and I think it comes down to your situation. Like if you're a playoff championship contender in your league, you may not want to get too greedy and do something a little bit foolish, like you said, dropping a Joe Flacco to get Tim Tebow. But if you're on the fringe of the playoffs and you're looking for an upside guy that could kind of put you over the top, then I think Tebow's perfect for that because, we just don't know what's going to happen going forward because we've only seen him in 3 games last year. We've seen him in a half this year. So what's going to happen when teams actually game plan for him, have some film on him that they can break him down and start to take advantage of some of his weaknesses?
Guys, good Tebow talk. We'll be back right after this. We're going to be talking about the backfields. I mean, we've had a long had a trend in the NFL of backfields being by committee, and this year it just seems to be going crazy. So we'll be right back right after this. So I guess perhaps the most interesting one at the moment is among the backfields that are in the NFL, fantasy-relevant backfields that are in flux, would be in Kansas City, where Jackie Battle, great name by the way, Jackie Battle came out, ran for over 100 yards, but they also have Thomas Jones, who has long been a fantasy stalwart, even if he's just a fringe running back 2, running back 3 type guy. And then Dexter McCluster, who at least in Yahoo leads, and I believe CBS leads, qualifies as a running back and a wide receiver, getting a little bit of an added role now that Jamal Charles is out. George, how do you see Kansas City breaking down? And are there any other running back situations that you think fantasy managers really need to pay close attention to?
Well, I think Jackie Battle put his best foot forward for the lead job from here on out. I mean, Thomas Jones is getting on in age. He's not going to be able to...
You're being polite.
Yeah, he's not going to be able to carry a full load. And Dexter McCluster is more of a, I hate to say, gimmick type of a back, out of the backfield runs and reverses. So Jackie Battle has as good a chance as any to be the lead guy for the rest of the way. The thing is, we have seen Jackie Battle for about 4 years now, and he hasn't gotten it done over the long term. So I'm kind of, hedging my bets here. I say he comes out of the bye. Kansas City's schedule is pretty favorable for the first 4 or 5 weeks. He does well, but then things could get tough because Kansas City's schedule gets tough in the last 5 weeks of the season.
Are there any other running back situations that you've been looking at and saying to yourself, man, that's a little bit more muddied than it really should be, or I'm worried about that one?
Well, I'm not so sure if I'm worried about it, but a great opportunity this week is Tampa Bay's backfield. LeGarrette Blount gets a hit on his knee against the 49ers, and they don't expect him to play this week, so Ernest Graham's going to get the call, and they're going up against the Saints, who are in the top 10 in points allowed to running backs. So Ernest Graham, who can do some things that Blount can't do, like catch the ball out of the backfield.
Basic things.
Yeah, so he's now the number one guy going into this week, and probably a waiver claim right behind Battle. But if you need him for this week, Battle's on bye, you might push Graham ahead of Battle.
How long would you expect to hold on to Graham?
I would hold on to him for the rest of the season if you're a Blount owner, obviously. But if you're not, then you're looking at maybe 1-2 weeks.
Sean, are you seeing any running back situations? I'm seeing several other, situations that would be frightening to me if I had them on my teams. And there's one where I do have a guy on my team. I'm almost racked with paralysis when I'm looking at the waiver wire and the guys that are his backups. I don't know if I can hold on to all those guys and if I have enough depth, enough roster space to deal with them.
Well, as messy as the Kansas City backfield is, I still don't think it rivals the Washington backfield right now, and that's just because of the unpredictable factor that Mike Shanahan brings to this team. He'll go one way, he'll go the other way. Tim Hightower, Ryan Terrain, both of them have, received significant playing time. Both go up and down. And then you still have Roy Halou in the mix, who is that guy that everyone kind of wants to break out, but they're not sure when that's going to happen. So I'd say Washington's a great example. And, of course, you have to figure in Pittsburgh now with the injury to Mendenhall. Everyone was kind of waiting on Isaac Redmond to have that breakout game, but it turns out to be Jonathan Dwyer who comes out of nowhere and has a 100-yard game.
I mean, and when you get a Jonathan Dwyer sighting, that's when you know everything's going crazy. I mean, how do you see the Pittsburgh situation breaking down? Are they going to go with Dwyer moving forward and have Redmond be the short yardage back, which is kind of how they wanted Redmond to be before the season with Mendenhall, or do you think that they're going to go more even-handed with them?
I think that, like you said, they wanted Redmond to kind of be that short yardage back, and right now that offensive line is just in a complete mess, so it's tough to predict. I think that, they'll still give Redmond his chances, but don't be surprised to see a lot more of Jonathan Dwyer going forward. He's a bit more explosive, he's more fast, he has more big play ability, which, of course, in fantasy football means a lot, which you saw last night with someone like Javid Best.
Yeah, and I'd just like to point out, we were talking about Washington. They have a great matchup this week against the Eagles, so it could be a case where Terrain and Hightower are used. And then with Pittsburgh, now we're hearing that Rashard Mendenhall might be able to play this week against Jacksonville.
I mean, it's one of those things where, as you guys are pointing out, it's all totally in flux. You need to keep a close eye on everything. George, since you're mentioning Mendenhall might be back, he might not be, again, is someone like Dwyer a clear-cut pickup even for non-Mendenhall owners?
I would have said that an hour ago. He was a clear-cut pickup. I would have put him ahead of, Donald Brown, a guy who could see carries now that Joseph Adai is out. But now, with Mendenhall coming back, now you have to say, well, if I own Mendenhall, yeah, he's important. But if I don't, and I just need like a immediate help, then no. So it all depends on your situation. It's really a crazy time right now.
You know what else I liked in what you just said? You just mentioned that the Philly game is going to be a tough matchup for the Eagles. And that actually segues into our Nets segment, which we're going to get into right after this. So looking forward at the matchups, the actual fantasy matchups, fantasy-relevant matchups in the NFL this week. Philadelphia against Washington. We just talked about the running back situation in Washington, but from a fantasy point of view, Philadelphia has to be looking like a really interesting opponent if your team is facing them, because they're just really not that good a team in real life anymore. I mean, their offense will put up great numbers. They still put up good numbers, good to great numbers. But it just seems odd that a team that, I don't know what the term would be, that's so unimpressive in real life would be that fantasy relevant still.
I think that their defense is actually droppable. I mean, we talked about the dream team before the season, but the yards they're giving up on the ground, it negates anything they have in the passing defense. I mean, you don't have to test Nnamdi Asomugha if you're running for 5 yards a carry every play. You don't have to worry about Jason Babin coming after you in the pass rush. So yeah, I think their defense is droppable, but this is another thing like Tebow where reality doesn't match up to fantasy on offense. Getting behind in all these games is actually helping because the Eagles, they're all on pace. They're ahead of last year's pace. Even Michael Vick in passing yards, he's way ahead of last year.
I think it's interesting because you mentioned the Eagles' offense are still putting up good numbers, and that's really what matters in fantasy football. As awful as they've been on the field and as awful as their record might look, Michael Vick's still putting up 20-plus fantasy points a game. Jeremy Maclin, Deshaun Jackson are still getting it done. So these are guys that you still have to keep in your starting lineup regardless. And as far as the defense, that's interesting because that's kind of been a theme that we've seen throughout this year. The majority of drafts saw Green Bay and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia be some of the top 3 defenses in often cases, and all of them have glaring issues right now.
It also seems to me a little bit of a game mechanics issue, where when the offense is that good, in the case of Green Bay at least, when the offense is that good and that quick striking, they still give a lot of possessions to the other team too. And no matter how good they are, they're still going to give up a couple touchdowns every game just because they're putting up 40 points. And the other team gets their 2 touchdowns or whatever it is, and it just seems that way, feels that way. What about when you look at teams like New England, where their defense, they're just not that good at all on defense, but Dallas, they're playing against them this week. Sean, do you think that Dallas is a good matchup from a fantasy perspective? Because even though they've kind of had middling results, again, it looks like they're doing pretty well, especially with Miles Austin coming back. Tony Romo's is coming off of a bye. What do you think about that game?
I do. I think that this is a prime example of looking at, fantasy from a separate aspect as you're looking at the actual game. You're looking at the game, you're thinking New England should win this game convincingly. But from a fantasy aspect, you have to remember Dallas is expected to get Miles Austin back this week, and before he went out with that injury, he was one of, if not the top receiver in fantasy football. So combine him with what they have going with Dez Bryant right now, I think you're looking at a big game for both of them and Tony Romo as well against, at best, questionable, and that's being nice, New England secondary.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say that Laurent Robinson, it was nice knowing you. I mean, Miles Austin is coming back to take your spot, and you might be able to pick up some scraps this week, but it's doubtful when Jason Witten is the third receiver really in Dallas.
George, what do you think about the other side of that matchup with the Patriots? Stephen Ridley getting a lot more carries, Danny Woodhead coming off of an injury, but Jarvis Green-Ellis is still the clear-cut running back starter, I would say, but the trend is, I think, that Ridley's been getting a lot more carries. Is that something to be worried about if you're an owner of the law firm?
Well, the law firm pretty much put the smackdown on Ridley last week when he went for 2 touchdowns and I think it was 20-plus carries against a surprisingly bad Jets run defense. I mean, they knew it was coming the whole fourth quarter and couldn't stop it. But the thing with the Patriots is, Tom Brady is really the only thing in that offense that you can count on from week to week because they have so many weapons. Even Rob Gronkowski, who got off to a great start in the first 3 weeks, has been off the last 2 weeks. So you just keep rolling your guys out there, hoping that they'll be the guy that Brady, zones in on, or Belichick gives the carries to, because it could change from a week-to-week basis. But you just kind of look at the matchup. Is the team bad at covering tight ends? Okay, then I have Gronkowski and Hernandez in, both that week.
Now, you're talking about playing matchups and things like that. I think that there's also a game this weekend, and we all have personal stakes in this because Sean is a Lions fan and George and I are Niners fans, 49ers fans, that with two guys who have been, I would say, emblematic of what it means to analyze a player from a fantasy perspective. Let's start with Alex Smith, quarterback of the 49ers. This is not a joke. I'm kidding you not. He is third in the NFL in passer rating. Now, if you're playing fantasy and only looking at fantasy stats, I think in standard leagues he's 14th in points, something like that, which is way better than he's been in just about any other stage of his career. And then that passer rating thing might make you think, holy smokes, he might actually be useful to a fantasy team. But I would argue that even at his very best, in that 1 year with Mike Singletary when they did the spread for 6 games, he really wasn't that fantasy useful. He was basically Ryan Fitzpatrick on a bad day. So if he's doing as well as he is now, there's no reason to keep him. There's no reason to play him even. I would say he has to do this for a full year. Now, does that sound reasonable to you, George?
Well, I actually view Alex Smith as kind of the goal line vulture running back of quarterbacks because he has a good quarterback rating and he throws, as long as he throws touchdowns and avoids turnovers, he can put up a decent fantasy score, but he's 26th in passing yards. I mean, he's down there with some of the dregs of fantasy society.
I mean, they've got a very conservative passing game. Did you just say the dregs of fantasy society?
I did.
Wow. Now we're getting caste systems in here.
Well, he's down there, but I mean, no, I don't believe in him. I just don't. He just doesn't put up enough yards. Like you said, it's a conservative offense, and he's going to see a really big pass rush this week that can rotate 8 or 9 guys on that line and really come after him, put the pressure. And he's had some struggles on the road with decision-making and turnovers, so I'd be a little wary of playing Alex Smith this week.
And on the opposite end of the spectrum, on the Lions, we have Megatron, Calvin Johnson, a guy who, we actually went back and looked up his high school stats the other day in the office, and he's always, even into the NFL, been the super tools guy who didn't quite produce the results that everyone thought that his tools should produce until this year. 9 touchdown receptions, if I'm remembering it correctly. I should be, because he's on my team. The guy is just absolutely destroying everyone, and lots of people are now pointing out that finally the Lions realized that he has such amazing tools. You just throw a jump ball to him in the end zone, and he's almost an automatic touchdown. So, Sean, do you believe that this new level of Calvin Johnson's play is for real, or do you think that he's more likely to go back down to the Calvin Johnson we've seen the past few years of being really, really good, but merely one of the top 7 or 8 receivers in the game?
Well, coming into this year, I'll tell you, I had a draft where I took Calvin Johnson over Andre Johnson, and I was criticized for it.
Roundly criticized, I'm sure.
Roundly criticized, and despite my love for the Lions, that wasn't even the reason why. It's because that this guy, like you said, can go up and get any ball that's there, and really, Detroit had a nice running game last night against Chicago, but in reality, that running game is pretty subpar, and therefore, throwing a fade to Calvin Johnson from the 4 or 5 yard line is often their best option when they get into the red zone. He's a huge play target, not to mention that this is the most weapons that Detroit has surrounded him with, which is obviously helping taking away those double teams from him. They have guys like Titus Young, Nate Burleson, Brandon Pettigrew, guys that can stretch the field and make plays, which, you can't shade that safety strictly over to Johnson now, which opens the field for Matthew Stafford, who is also having a tremendous fantasy year.
So you're just expecting this to just keep going on. He's going to threaten Randy Moss's touchdown record.
Not only threaten, break it.
Oh, that's a prediction there. George, your thoughts on Calvin Johnson?
Well, he's on pace for 29 touchdown receptions right now, which is pretty ridiculous. But I will say this, Sean, you gained yourself 50 fantasy points at this point in the season by not taking Andre Johnson over Calvin Johnson.
Right.
Same thing for Roddy White owners. So sorry if you drafted Roddy White or Andre Johnson, but them's the facts. And Calvin Johnson has 50 more points than each of those guys.
On that note, let's just remember Calvin Johnson bow down before him until proven otherwise. Guys, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.